I want to welcome you back to another segment of He Said.
She Said.
And again, I'm Michael.
And I'm Victoria.
All right, and Vicky, she goes by Vicky. One of the things that we wanted to do for sure in He Said, She Said was to spend enough time with each person talking about issues that are relationship-related issues. Not necessarily to solve any problems, but to just discuss it, to let people know that you can discuss these things and share them with someone else. Sometimes you get the same response as you have, sometimes not. And I mentioned in our previous podcast, and if you listen to them in chronological order, which you probably should, this is the third of the interviews with Vicky. But I mentioned in the previous interview the issue of relationships as an African American male and Vicky as a Caucasian female, the black and white issue where men are in relationships with either, say, a black woman or a white woman, and there are different responses or different reactions or different interactions between the two. Not always the same, but it seems as though, in my experience, African American women are oftentimes not all that encouraging and supportive of African American men. I am going to invite a group of women to a He Said, She Said podcast. We have one scheduled for December, that they're mostly women of color, and they're going to jump all over me on this issue. So you're gonna hang around. I'm gonna take my punches. But you had mentioned, Vicky, that you, as a white woman who likes black men, predominantly, that you're very supportive, and that there's a difference. We mentioned the difference between being supportive and being supporting.
I have black girlfriends who feel that the reason black men are with white women is because we're very gullible, and we will not hold them for their stuff when they're pulling their stuff. And now that I'm a lot of years older than I was back when I first started, I think the first black gentleman that I dated when I was in my 20s, I was very gullible. I believed a whole lot of mess he was running past me. I wouldn't fall for that now, but on the other hand, I don't think I would be as aggressively in his face about it. I would just disappear. I would just be finished. Where I know that a number of my girlfriends would cut him to shreds when he's pulling the stuff. So yes, I probably handle it different than some of my African American girlfriends.
And I get that because my African American female friends would pretty much fall in the same category. They wouldn't take the stuff. Yeah, and they would get up in his face, get all up in his business about it. So I think that is one of the things that's a problem. One is that, like, if you're a police officer and you pull a car over, you oftentimes automatically assume that that's a criminal in that car. You're prepared for that. It may not be, but you're prepared for that. And I think that going into a relationship where you're prepared for the criminal aspect, prepared for the stuff that a person puts out, sometimes prejudices you, but sometimes, like a police officer, that person is a criminal.
It prepares you. But I also believe that people will behave up to what you expect. And when a wife expects her husband to do bad things, he will. If she encourages him and tells him how wonderful it is, he will do his best to live up to what she's expecting him to do, good or bad.
Okay, when you think about the maturity factor, I think that men evolve and become mature at a much slower rate. So it turns out not just black men necessarily, or any ethnic
male population,
just males in general, try to get away with the same kind of childish stuff that they did when they were teenagers. They may, not all, again, for anybody out there who thinks that I make a statement about someone and I'm claiming that all people fit that category, they may be one of those people who doesn't have the brain power to think past that.
Right.
And so I'm just saying that if it happens with one person, then it's worth mentioning. So if you have a guy who is 30, 40, 50 years old, and actually spends a great deal of his time playing games on his PlayStation or his Xbox instead of doing something with his partner, and that's an issue in their relationship, don't you think that he might want to grow up and stop playing as many Xbox games and PlayStation games?
But I also think you have to take it a step farther and look at the family of origin that he came from. Because if he had a mother who totally doted on him and did not call him on any of his stuff, you can't expect him at 40, 50, or 60 to be accountable for his behavior, because he has slid through life not having to be accountable.
All right, so that's a good point. So if he got away with it and he was a mama's boy and he was pampered and babied, and then he met his first adult relationship, and let's say he meets his first relationship and that person is very accommodating and gullible and puts up with his stuff and cleans up his dirty socks instead of telling him to pick up his dirty socks and does chores for him, don't you think that it's obviously partly the fault of the guy for not growing up? He doesn't have to, but it's another part the fault of the woman who keeps enabling that and letting it happen.
Absolutely.
So if you're a black woman and you've decided you don't want to enable that, and so you go into a relationship saying, I'm not going to put up with any stuff, so as soon as I see the first sign of some stuff, I'm going to be in your face. Or if you're a white woman who is very gullible and says, I love the attention that you're giving me, and so because of that, I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to
put up with it.
Yeah, put up with it. Then that just keeps that guy poorly trained.
It perpetuates it.
Yes. And so then what do we expect from a guy, black, white, or red or green, if we don't hold him accountable? But if we don't give him the tools to be accountable, that's the other issue. Let me give you an example. We don't hold a guy accountable for being the man of the house, and I don't mean that in a chauvinistic way. I bring in income, I bring resources, I can fix the plumbing, or I can get a person to fix it. I drive the car that, if we go out someplace, I take the lion's share of the driving so you can have a nice comfortable trip. But if a guy can't do that because he doesn't have a good job, he can't get away from work to go spend time with his kids, he can't afford a decent car, so his car is always breaking down, he has to borrow his girlfriend's car or his wife's car. We're trying to hold him accountable, but we're not being very accommodating or supportive of him if we have any impact in that outcome at all as a society. I don't mean to say it's society's fault and it's society's responsibility to raise men, but I think it's like the village concept that we're all in this together, and if we expect black men, white men, red men, green men to be men, then we need to change that paradigm of what we will tolerate with men.
I think in the last 10 years, though, I've seen it coming around where you see all of the Tyler Perry, where he came out and admitted what he'd gone through, and they were encouraging men to start speaking their truth about the things that they'd gone through, and or the Men of Courage, where they're trying to convict men that you are accountable for raising your children. And I think that's starting to come around a little bit more than it would have before 10 years ago. I don't think there was the same kind of sentiment that men need to be responsible for how you're raising your family. You can't just take off.
And the thing about it, it's really difficult to hold a person accountable if you have a couple of guys together and they're out at a bar and they're having a good old time, just a bunch of guys talking, having a good old time, sport bar, and one of the husbands slips out of the bar with one of the female bar patrons and has a little tryst with her. What do you think the chances are that any of those guys are going to say you shouldn't do that? Or any of those guys are going to report that to his wife? Zero, right? They're not going to admonish him about that. They're not going to say, ooh, that's bad. They're going to shove it under the carpet.
Unless his wife is the sister of one of those men.
No, okay, there throws in a different,
totally different story.
But I bet that his method of dealing with it would be to get upset with him because he cheated on his sister, you know, if he's protective of his sister.
Right.
But almost still a little bit of a high five with, hey, you got away with something good. Don't do that again, not with my sister or something, not against my sister. I don't know, but these are the guys that I know. Would go to a strip club and they would spend money on a stripper. And they know that their wives are not really in approval of that. And they would keep that quiet, lips zipped. And it's expected that they spend their time in a strip club. It's expected that a guy would have a woman on the side. It's expected that, you know, he would try to get away with.
See, and I didn't grow up in that kind of community.
Neither did I, but that's what I see. Maybe that's just a tainted, tarnished view of the world, but I don't want to finish all this on big-time negativity. I am very, very curious to know what it's going to take to get people to talk about relationship issues and be willing to say the uncomfortable, the difficult things. Like, what do you say if you're a black woman and you're upset with your black man because he's dating a white woman? What do you say about that? How do you have that discussion? You have to address and face some of the realities.
And yet I'm noticing that now it's becoming much more common to see a black woman with a white guy.
Yes.
And you never used to see that at all, anywhere. And now it's becoming much more common.
Yeah, in fact, the black women that I have talked to who do date non-black men have said that they oftentimes get treated more like a lady, more respectfully. They have a little bit better support. There's a little bit less confrontation. There's a little bit less drama.
So do you want my reasoning for why that happens?
Go for it.
Anytime you go into a mixed relationship, you had to know up front you were going to be facing big odds. So anybody that's willing to go into that is willing to work harder than somebody that's going to take the easy way out. And that's why one side is going to treat the other side much better than they would if it were their own race. Because they know it's going to be a tough haul. And if they don't stick together, they are not going to make it.
They're going to be alone. I don't know that the times are really changing enough, but they are changing, that people are much more accepting of mixed race relationships.
Well, on the television, it's there. So it's in your face all the time, where it didn't used to be. It used to be something that was kept hidden.
Okay, but to address that issue, I remember in the media production business, when one of the radio stations put up a billboard to introduce their radio station to the community, they had a variety of mixed race people in the ad. And that was fine because it addressed people that the viewer could identify with. So they didn't think, oh, this is just a black station because there's a black woman in the ad, or this is just a white station because there's a white one. So they had a variety of mixed races in the ad. And then when they put out an ad that had one person up there, it was a mixed race woman. It was I think they call them mulatto.
Incredibly beautiful.
Incredibly beautiful.
See, my children are all mixed race children, and they are definitely the most beautiful people.
That's one of the attributes of mixing the races up. You get kind of the best of all.
Well, my feeling is, as this goes along and we mix and mix and mix more up, it will be very hard to be bigoted because you won't know who anybody is.
Exactly.
It'll all look the same.
Yeah,
and that's the perfect world.
Yeah, I think that would be the perfect world for some and the perfect hell for others.
Of course.
You know, but so in this time when you and I, being in our 60s, when we came from an environment where they wouldn't put an opposite race person on there as your expected date. They wouldn't put a commercial on there where you have a mixed couple. Never. That is just you know, no. Times have changed, and we're going to try to address those changes as time goes on. But I want to thank you for bearing through this whole black, white woman, black man, you know, conversation, because it can be entertaining, but it can also be a little bit painful and frustrating. But Vicky, I want to thank you again for joining us on He Said.
She said.
And I want to thank you all for listening as well. And we may come up with some more and invite Vicky back for some more conversation, especially after I have the conversation with the group of black women coming up in December.
I can't wait to hear it.
I know. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.